Hey, this is Reckless Rush and welcome to a brand new video. In this video, I will be talking about one of the newly teased cards that will be joining Stormbound, Temple of Heart. I originally wanted to do this discussion in my next Rush to Diamond video, but there's just so much to talk about here that I decided to make a full video on it. So, let's begin. Generally, when I look at new cards, I like to look at them in two perspectives. The first being an open-ended view, basically looking at them from a complete game perspective and seeing how the meta likes this card. The second being my Rush perspective and seeing how does Rush like this card. So let's start by analyzing the card. At level 1, Temple of Heart is 3 mana, 2 strength, and reads, at the start of your turn, remove 1 strength from stronger base and give it to the weaker one. So at first glance, this card is just mediocre because it can be beneficial or detrimental to your base health depending on who has more/less base health at the time it is triggered. But no. Don't be confused, dear. This card is actually insane. There are so many ways to go about this, but I think it's worth talking about base health. I love cards that feature base health shenanigans because it opens up this new way to play the game. For example, one way of making your Restless Goats and Broken Truce fit stronger in your deck is simply by raising your base health, which will lead to more open opportunities for you to use the cards. However, Temple of Heart is different. In fact, you are actually rewarded for being less base health than your opponent. So already, this card synergizes with the 2 swarm cards I just mentioned above because you have ways of manually decreasing your base health. The next important thing to note here is base health gaps. In many cases, you will face enemies with different base healths than you, and combine this with the fact Temple of Heart is only 3 mana, you can actually play this card on your very first turn. This means you can apply instant pressure to the match. At this point, I'd like to compare this card to the only other structure in the game that can deal direct damage to the enemy base. At level 1, Pillars of Doom is 5 mana, 4 strength, and deals 2 damage to the enemy base every turn. When comparing these two cards, Temple of Heart is 2 mana cheaper, which is amazing for all sorts of reasons such as cycling faster, being able to play this card on your first turn, and if this card is countered by Execution, you still win the trade with +1 mana over your opponent. On top of that, if the ability is triggered once, it leads to a 2 base health difference, +1 going to you and -1 going to the opponent. Pillars also leads to a 2 base health difference. With the added bonus, it actually deals 1 extra damage to the enemy base instead of giving you the +1 health. But the biggest downside is the mana cost, because this card loses the mana exchange against Execution. It's important to mention here that Temple of Heart is a direct counter to Pillars as well. Ouch. Moving on to the next topic, Tempo Swings. This card has a very strong psychological impact to the game because if the 2 base healths are very close to one another, you definitely do not want to be on the side with the higher base health because the enemy would just take it away. This will lead to all kinds of weird situations, and we can start by analyzing a few. The first and most common will be the situation where you want to deal damage to the enemy base, but if you do, you will have the higher base health, and then the enemy will just steal it back from you. So instead of throwing in your 2 movement unit, you look to set it down either to defend your own base, or set it down 1 tile before the enemy base, so you can look to do 1 big push on your next turn. Keep in mind, this situation also works in reverse in the case where you are the one with the higher base health, so the enemy doesn't attack you directly on that turn. The next situation could be the consideration of self-damaging cards, Broken Truce and Restless Goats. In some cases, you could get away with attacking the enemy base because you know that Broken Truce/Restless Goats will make your base health even lower than the enemy on that turn. I'd like to point out that this card triggers at the start of the player's turn, meaning it can lead to massive pushes. For example, the drain triggers first, then your units walk in, plus it's still your turn to attack. It could also work unfavorably here because the enemy technically will have more control over who has the higher base health since the ability triggers after the opponent ends their turn. Overall, I think this card will have a strong impact on the tempo of the game, and I think it's pretty cool that players with level disparity might want to take a look at this card because it could be a game changer. I think this card will have all kinds of power, and we have yet to see its full result because we haven't seen its level 2 to 5 yet, so I'm personally quite excited. On that note, before jumping into my Rush perspective, I'd like to mention that although this card looks like a Rush counter, it can sometimes be good for Rush. Okay, so at first glance, I just think about my base health. I've hit Diamond 1 with 14 base health, and you won't really find that many players up there with the same base health. So I think this card will actually be bad against me and actually good for me in a lot of cases. For example, the enemy seriously cannot play this card turn 1 and probably the next few turns until the game starts going. This will also be the same situation for a lot of you rush players because you typically reach ranks with lower than the average base health for your rank. So now we can start thinking, is this card maybe good for rush? Well, I'd personally like to believe so. I mean, you can set this down early into the game and start stealing your opponent's base health before actually committing to damage. In the long run, if this thing stays up though, it will probably do more harm than good. I think the best way to play this in a rush deck would be to set it down as close as possible to the enemy base. In fact, right in front of the enemy base so that you can use it to defend maybe a stronger unit. This can be super disgusting because if the enemy doesn't deal with it, some turns might go like the structure triggers first to steal the enemy base health, then your units walk in to the base dealing bonus damage, and then it's still your turn to do damage. On top of that, rush decks that run self-damaging cards will have slightly more control over their own base health. Also, since more and more structures are being introduced into the game, this is technically a slight indirect buff to Devastators because now you have more opportunities to grab extra value from it. Temple of Heart is a hefty nerf to chip decks because it can quite literally destroy the chip win condition. I think this card could see play in rush decks, particularly the players that have lower base health. If this card does see fit in RR, I think I would draw Potion of Vitality, but I'm not so sure as of right now, so we'll have to see its higher levels. Oh, and one more thing. For those of you wondering why they keep releasing new structures, basically this is how the story went. Someone on the Discord server complained how the 15 structure quests took too long to complete, so the next day the developers sat down and had a meeting discussion over it. Ideas were being tossed around and it was decided that the most brilliant one was to introduce new structures to the game. There was one individual who suggested just lowering the amount of structures needed to be played, but that person actually got fired for that idea, so we don't talk about them. I hope this video provided some insight on the new card, and I'm glad you watched this video. Peace!